Week 6, 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 to 23. Once when the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he took counsel with his officers. He said, "At such and such a place shall be my camp." But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Take care not to pass this place, because the Arameans are going down there." The king of Israel sent word to the place of which the man of God spoke. More than once or twice he warned such a place, so that it was on the alert. The mind of the king of Aram was greatly perturbed because of this. He called his officers and said to them, "Now tell me, who among us sides with the king of Israel?" Then one of his officers said, "No one, my lord king. It is Elisha, the prophet in Israel, who tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedchamber." He said, "Go and find where he is. I will send and seize him." He was told, "He is in Dothan." So he sent horses and chariots there and a great army. They came by night and surrounded the city. When an attendant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, an army with horses and chariots was all round the city. His servant said, "Alas, master, what shall we do?" He replied, "Do not be afraid, for there are more with us than there are with them." Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please open his eyes, that he may see." So the Lord opened the eyes of the servant, and he saw. The mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. When the Arameans came against him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, "Strike this people, please, with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek." And he led them to Samaria. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha said, "O Lord, open the eyes of these men, so that they may see." The Lord opened their eyes, and they saw that they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "Father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them?" He answered, "No. Did you capture with your sword and your bow those whom you want to kill? Set food and water before them, so that they may eat and drink, and let them go to their master." So he prepared for them a great feast. After they ate and drank, he sent them on their way, and they went to their master. And the Arameans no longer came raiding into the land of Israel.
After Jesus had washed their feet, put on his robe, and returned to the table, he said to them, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." John 13, verses 12 and 35. Deep into this season of Lent, this familiar scene is on our minds, the bread and the cup. A company of men not all on the same page. "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And yet the offer of peace, the hope of peace, that these men might love one another. Curiously enough, there is a scene reminiscent of that first century upper room way back in ancient Israel, where the prophet Elisha does establish peace after being at table with his enemies. In chapter 6, verse 8, we learn that this was a time when the king of Aram was at war with Israel once again. The Anchor Bible commentary says raids and ambushes across the border are likely to have characterized relations between Damascus and Samaria all through the 9th century BCE. The foreign king suspects that somebody in his camp was passing along to the king of Israel military secrets. But we know, of course, that the culprit is the man of God, Elisha, who's been providing these warnings. The text says that the king of Aram was greatly disturbed, verse 11. The phrase literally means that it went storming about, in much the same way as Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel's company, or Pharaoh. You remember when he had a bad dream. Jewish storytelling loves to picture these commanders-in-chief pouting in their rooms. The king sends his army south to Dothan, verse 13, to capture Elisha and put an end to this. But watch what happens. Early in the morning, verse 15, one of Elisha's servants discovers that the city is surrounded by the Syrian army, and he panics in language that we've heard before. Alas, master, what shall we do? But Elisha doesn't panic. He sees something which the servant initially does not. Horses and chariots of fire all around them. Verse 17. There are more of us than there are of them, he says. And with confidence, Elisha prayed to the Lord, verse 18, not for the enemy's destruction, but rather for their temporary blindness, so that he might trick them. This is not the way, he says in verse 19, and lead them even farther south to the capital city of Samaria, where the king of Israel would deal with them. Of course, in a time of war, the king has a plan. Father, shall I kill them? He says to Elisha, from whom he often seeks advice. Shall I kill them? Well, Elisha has a different vision. Volkmar Fritz says Elisha here is revealed as a defender of life and justice, even and especially concerning the enemy. Elisha says these men are not prisoners, they are guests, God's guests and our guests. Put a meal before them that they may eat. Food in verse 22 is the same Hebrew word often translated simply as bread. Bread and water. Same verse. You've seen the great things that Elisha can do with water. Don't miss the incredible irony. In the midst of political hostilities, Elisha offers an act of clemency, a great feast. Verse 23, a table prepared in the presence of his enemies, bread and cup, so that these foreign soldiers might go home again with a different story to tell about these Israelites. And thus the Arameans no longer came raiding into the land of Israel. Verse 23. Peace restored. Perhaps not forever. The very next line in chapter 6 begins a rather bizarre scene of renewed violence some time later, which the Peaks Bible Commentary says is probably from a whole different source. But for now, and hopefully sometime again, peace restored. The Wesley Bible Commentary says, this is a matter not of Israel's military strength, but of God's. Instead of harming the enemy, this is not the way. Israel is instructed to be hospitable by providing bread and water. A great feast for these strange guests who themselves respond by no longer harassing Israel. John Wesley taught, of course, that the sacred meal can itself be a means of grace. Deep in the season of Lent, we think theologically and missionally about the meal, the banquet of bread and cup, a table prepared in the company of our enemies as an offer of peace. Jim Todd, who is the lead pastor at East Stroudsburg United Methodist Church, will take us back to this eye-opening experience for Elisha and invite us today to consider the possibilities and the chance that in offering peace between rivals, there just might be more with us than there are with them. What great things God can do.
Recently, I changed the headlights in my Subaru. That's not earth-shaking by any means, but I was mildly excited by the process. I had been reading about the newest technology LED headlights, and I decided to take the plunge. When the LEDs arrived, I popped them in, and wow, what a difference. The lights seemed whiter and stronger and brighter than I had ever seen, and picked up things much further down the road. High visibility is something that we always want when we're out on the highway. Driving is dangerous enough, so why not try to mitigate some of its dangers with brighter headlights? Navigating life in this world is dangerous and full of risk for Christians, so we need spiritual visibility to help us see down life's highway. We have Elisha in the Old Testament, who seemed to travel through life with his high beams on, someone who even appears able to look around curves to see what's coming next. So connected was he to the living God. Over the past few weeks, you've read, studied, and discussed some important and amazing stories about the prophet Elisha. The story that you'll talk about today is no less important or amazing than all the others before it. There's no floating axe head in the story today, but a man's eyes are open to really see what God is doing around him. So let's set the stage. The king of Aram is at war with the king of Israel. But the king of Israel always seems to know what the king of Aram is up to and to thwart his every move. The Aramean king is sure that there must be an Israelite mole in his military organization, and he's determined to root out the traitor in his midst. But the king finds out that it's even worse than that. We find out in verse 12 of chapter 6 of 2 Kings that there is no mole, but there is a prophet, the one referred to throughout 2 Kings as the man of God. That man, of course, is Elisha, and an officer in the king's army tells him something really scary. This guy, Elisha, is so good at finding out what you're doing that he even knows what you're talking about in your bedchamber, O king. This shakes the king to his very core, and now he's determined to kill Elisha. The king can't have this guy knowing the king of Aram's every move and then ratting on him to his sworn enemy. The king finds out where Elisha is located and sends a brigade of troops and horses and chariots to surround Dothan to flush out and to kill Elisha. Meanwhile, Elisha himself is unperturbed. He's got his spiritual high beams on, and he knows what God is up to in order to preserve his life and not allow his voice to go silent. When his attendant goes outside the next morning and sees the city surrounded by the enemy, he freaks out. Elisha, they're coming for you, and they're already here. What are we going to do? The attendant here sounds a little bit like the disciples when they wake Jesus in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, panicked that the boat is going to capsize in the wind and the waves of a sudden storm. Elisha, in the same manner as Jesus, calmly tells the attendant not to be afraid, and then prays to God, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." God does open his eyes, and the attendant looks around and he sees what Elisha sees, the mountains full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha, 2 Kings 6:17. God is protecting his people, and especially his servant Elisha. If we were writing the script for this story, perhaps it would be something straight out of one of the Lord of the Rings movies. Huge armies clashing with one another, and after much carnage and death, the good guys would come out on the other side victorious. But this is God's script, not ours. God has a different plan for Elisha and God's people. Quite unexpectedly, Elisha prays another prayer as the Aramean army descends on him and the people of Dothan. "Strike this people, please, with blindness," 2 Kings 6:18. God answers Elisha's prayer, and the entire army of the Arameans is struck blind. There's not a whole lot an army can do when every member of the army is blind. Elisha, always the helpful man of God, offers to lead them. What could they do but follow? He leads them right into what could have been the trap of all traps, right into Samaria, right to the king of Israel's doorstep. Again, Hollywood would have a field day with a script like this, but this is God's story again, not ours. The king of Israel knows that Hollywood script and wants to act it out. "Father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them?" He's so anxious, so excited, he asks Elisha twice. And here's where God flips the script again. Elisha respectfully tells his king that he, the king, has not captured these prisoners. They are not his, they belong to God. Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink, and let them go to their master. It would be customary, if you were not actually going to kill your enemy prisoners, to offer the barest necessities to keep them alive, just a small amount of stale bread and water perhaps. But the king listens to Elisha, and actually goes overboard in his hospitality. After God restores the sight of the Aramean army, the Israelite king prepared for them a great feast. After they ate and drank, he sent them on their way, the scripture says. We don't know what these Arameans were thinking at this point, but we do know what it resulted for the Israelites. And it says the Arameans no longer came raiding into the land of Israel. 2 Kings 6:23. Oftentimes we find we have stark choices in life when confronted with a particular situation. Either we can act on our own impulses, which usually take us in the wrong direction, or we can listen to the nudging of the Holy Spirit and ask God how God would have us respond. Being sinful human beings, we often want to respond to conflict and aggression with further conflict and aggression. We don't care if it escalates the situation. We just want justice our way. But Jesus shows us a different way, a better way, and calls us to open our eyes and to see what God is doing. In John 13, we see Judas plotting against Jesus, and Jesus knows full well that his own disciple Judas is going to betray him. Yet he does nothing to stop his evil plot, but instead tells the rest of the disciples, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another." That's in John 13:34. Elisha prayed for his servant, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." May that prayer also be our prayer, that we would echo that old hymn of the church, "Open my eyes that I may see glimpses of truth you have for me." The greatest truth, that God is love, and God desires that each of us, that when faced with evil, conflict, and aggression, and whatever life throws at us, to always respond with love. Have you allowed God to open your eyes and switch on your high beams for the road ahead?